President Trump facing that big fine in New York and admitting that they cannot get together the fine. So what happens
Letitia
next?
James could start, literally, she could start seizing Trump's assets Monday.
Yeah, when the deadline comes.
Yes, well, it's Monday.
And his team has put forward the court that they cannot.
They do not have the cash to do it.
Right.
Michael is calling in New Hampshire on line 1. Michael, you're on the air.
Yes, hi. My question is a three-part one having to do with Letitia James's threat to take those assets of Trump's. The first part of the question is, can she take everything he owns, all of his assets, or only the assets whose net worth would total the amount of the bond that he's being required to post? The second part of the question is, who determines that value? Do they go out to some third-party objective source like a commercial appraiser? Yeah. And the third part of my question is there any precedence in the law for this happening?
Let me start with your third question. There's no precedent for a bond in this amount. That's outrageous. So that's, they're doing this because he's Donald Trump. With regard to who will set the value, they will have to go to a third party. They're not allowed to over-collateralize the bond.
Right.
That's not allowed. But the other aspect of this, and I think this is important to understand, is she could start levying assets on Monday. Harry Hutchinson just joined us. But a lot of those properties have mortgages on them. I mean, that was part of this whole thing.
Right.
And because they've got mortgages, Harry, she'd have to satisfy those mortgages before she could sell the properties.
That is
which New York is not going to be able to do.
I think you're absolutely correct. In addition to that, given the fact that the properties are mortgaged, then Donald Trump's net interest in the property would be reduced, arguably, by the mortgage. And so the caller's question, I think, is appropriate. She may have to seek additional assets in order to satisfy the bond.
Yeah, so Michael, the problem here is one asset class, let's say 40 Wall Street, he owns that, may not have enough equity in it to satisfy it. So, yeah, then she would be able to go to
another. I mean, you could almost put together a conglomeration of buildings.
That's probably what they will. I would not be surprised, actually, if she leans everything in New York.
I think that's what she loves to do.
I think that's what she wants to do. Lean everything in New York, which pretty much stops him from doing business.
What happens to people who are working inside those buildings?
Well, the buildings still function.
Because they're talking about putting like a padlock on Trump Tower, but that's not really...
That would be absurd.
Other companies are operating there.
Other companies operate there, or there are other residents that live there. Yeah. So they cannot interfere with existing contracts. But I think you have to put this case, that's the New York civil case, and then you go right down to the case in Fulton County. Nothing is going by the normal rules here. Yeah. If you were to have a finding of an apparent conflict of interest or an appearance of impropriety with an odor of mendacity in a case, Harry, the case would be taken to another DA.
Absolutely.
If it was anyone else.
Yeah.
So I think if you look at the facts and circumstances of the case, as described by Judge McAfee, this suggests that Fani Willis has launched a compromise prosecution against Donald Trump, and that the appropriate penalty would indeed be disqualification. Nonetheless, the judge decides to do the opposite. He simply talks about her misconduct, but then he lacks the courage to do the right thing, meaning he lacks the courage to disqualify. And so I think this is very puzzling to the American people.
Now, you just came back from our offices in France, and you said there was a lot of interest in all of these cases, which you would think normally there would not be.
Well, absolutely. That's because right now in Europe, and also we've seen in South America, political leaders who have fallen in elections become targets of legal attacks. So we saw it in Brazil with a conservative leader. Sarkozy is facing that in France as we speak. So his party leadership there, so it's becoming the norm throughout Europe, is that if you lose, somehow you violate the law, and they come at you to basically try and ruin you from ever re-entering politics, especially in Europe, where re-entering politics is pretty normal if you're a well-known name. And again, so you have to be ready, especially this new right in Europe that has been forming, and they've been forming in places like Hungary, Italy, Poland, and in France, to realize the lawfare that is going to be coming at them from inside their own country. So they watch carefully how Donald Trump is being treated by the country that says equal justice under law.
But Harry, the fact that we could be looked at, I mean, Israel has this problem too. How many prime ministers, they get Benjamin Netanyahu, who's under a criminal investigation now, trial. Ehud Olmert ended up getting convicted, the former excellent prime minister, but ended up being convicted and went to jail for a year. The fact that we're now looking like these countries destabilizes the world, I think. It's a negative effect geopolitically.
Absolutely. And it begins to suggest that democracy has become meaningless. So if you look at our Constitution, if you look at our history and tradition, the rule of law was paramount. Increasingly, the rule of law in the United States is becoming subservient to the political interest of the party in power. So I think Jordan is precisely correct. If you look at Brazil, if you look at France, they, in some respects, are taking marching orders from the United States. And guess what? We just had an election in Russia. Many people in the West, they criticize that election. Well, guess what? I'm not sure that Russia is any worse than what's going on in the United States in terms of its adherence to the rule of law.
And at the same time, we have filed, let's put it up on the screen, our brief in the immunity case has now been filed at the Supreme Court of the United States. So there it is. And that case will be argued with, I think it's April 24th. It's another big case because this idea that a president could be held criminally liable for official acts is absurd. No other country allows that, by the way. I mean, most countries have those protections in place because if you don't, you can't govern. Right. And all of these cases impact the ability to govern. And that is, to me, I think the biggest issue of what's going on with all of these cases. And then you had the Biden investigations going on at the same time. So this is a joke that what's happening. I mean, except it's very serious. It looks horrible on the world stage. You were just there with a lot of
the number
leaders.
of special counsels that are being investigated. So you have Robert Hur giving that testimony. That is all seen now in real time in Europe. I think that we live in a different age now, but because of all the YouTube channels that the House Judiciary has, you don't have to wait for like French news to start covering that. If you're in politics on the right, you're watching the moves taken by Republican leadership like Jim Jordan and these names. They watch those channels to find out kind of what is going on in the larger conservative movement. So they see the investigations. They do wonder, again, the strategy. How does this happen to Donald Trump but not Joe Biden? Because they hear the rhetoric about Joe Biden doing this, that, but then they see that Donald Trump is up against what in any of these other countries would be a legal tsunami that you could not survive.
Remember also, this defamation litigation that's going on is another way to silence voices. And, you're seeing that in media, Logan. You're seeing it in the political realm as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're fighting back against it. We were watching, obviously, last night. You had the whole situation with Don Lemon dropped his episode with Elon Musk and how that all played out.
So
we're seeing a lot.
I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched a few minutes of. What was the story with that?
I think that Don Lemon pulled his typical stunt, which was
obnoxious.
Go in there, be obnoxious, ask the same question 40 times, try to get somebody to, a gotcha moment. He didn't really get one. And honestly, it made Elon, I feel like, much stronger. And I think that not that many people watched it, to be honest, in general. So it's not that big of a deal.